we can start this next episode of the Master Your Exit live show. I kind of lost track of how many episodes we did, but I think we're close to probably about 20 already. So I would say that's pretty epic. So if you're watching this, well, welcome to the Master Your Exit live show powered by The Big Exit. And together with Graham today, we will be hosting this show. And on the Master Your Exit live show, we bring practical insights, we bring expert interviews, we have interviews with exiteers as well. And we bring you also tools to help small business owners like you prepare for your big exit. And this live show airs every Tuesday at 7 a.m. in Los Angeles, 10 a.m. in New York, or 3 p.m. in London. So no matter where you are in the world, there's probably a time for you to come and join us live. We keep each show short and simple, about 30 minutes maximum. And if you're tuning in on our YouTube or on our LinkedIn channel, welcome. If you've joined us here live in our virtual studio, that's awesome too. You can drop all your exit related questions in our studio chat, and we answer them live here on the show today. And if you're catching this episode later, you can find more of all of the episodes basically on our website, thebigexit.co/master your exit shows with a little dash in between every single word, or you can listen to the audio version on your favorite podcast platform. In today's show, we are having a Q&A session, which we do every 4 weeks, more or less. And based on multiple questions that we have received from our audience, we've picked a question to answer today. And it's a pretty crucial question, I would say, for those who are thinking about the process of selling their business, including, the prep work up front and the actual selling process. And the answer to the question will, I'm assuming, influence your timeline on when to start with your exiting journey. And it's probably much earlier than you think. So the question that we are going to cover today is, how long does it take to sell a small business? And there's a very short answer to that based on recent data that we have been capturing and that we know about the marketplace of selling and buying businesses. So there's a very short answer to it. But then there's obviously also a very nuanced answer to that question on how long does it take to sell a small business. And that more nuanced answer will probably be more relatable to the personal journey that you might be on in selling your business. So, Graham, I thought about, first of all, maybe starting with the short answer, like how long does it take to sell a small business? And then maybe dive into, the more nuanced answer to that. And to give the short answer, the good news is there's a lot of data available on how long it takes to sell a business, specifically data that's been captured by business buying and selling platforms, because they know how long a business has been put on the platform until it sells, basically. So they capture that data. You can find that data on a lot of the platforms that are available out there, whether that's, Flippa.com or BizBuySell or, any Baton Market, for example. So most of the marketplaces out there, they capture this data of anything in between, the time in between the business gets put on the platform for sale and it actually sells, leaving out all of the businesses that are not being sold yet, or all of the businesses that are kind of still pending and they haven't officially been brought onto the market. So that's a little bit of nuance there. And I just gathered the most recent report that BizBuySell has put out for Q1 2025. So I'm assuming they'll be releasing another report pretty soon, but that's the most recent data that they have available for all like the smaller mid-market businesses that have been sold on their platform. And the data shows two things for Q1. One is businesses are longer on the market than they were last year, Q1 2024, about 15% longer. So that's it's quite a lot, I would say. And the median amount of time that a business is on sale. Do you want to take a guess, Graham, of what the data shows that BizBuy Sell has been gathering in Q1 2025?
Sure, I'll take a guess, but I'll disclaim all these things later because it's how long is a piece of string. But I would
Yeah.
imagine if we're talking about sub-$1 million businesses, and I'm sure there's a split because I think size of business will probably you'll see quite a shift in distributions. But I would guess um, about 6 months, and this is from time of listing, so through to time of
Yes.
sale. I would guess it's probably about 6 months on their platform, but maybe I'm way off.
Graham, you know this market inside out, but because they share median data, median basically means half of the businesses sell quicker and half of the businesses sell longer than the median. So it's not an average, which is different, but this is not a statistics class. But the median is just over 6 months. So 6.1 months. So you've been
I
just
guess I'm not going to be
spot
kicked
on.
off the. I'm not going to be kicked off the webinar.
I knew that you knew the market well enough to be able to answer this question more or less spot on. So that's exactly it. So 6 months. And as you've said it correctly, between putting it on the market, on the platform until selling. And it's a little bit longer than what it was last year, Q1. So to give you that idea, like if you ask how long does it take to sell my business, we can tell you based on some data that is being collected on the different platforms, more or less 6 months, right? Between putting it on the market and actually selling it. Now, there's a lot of nuance that goes into that. And the nuance is partially the the period before putting it on the market, which a lot of people forget, but there's a lot of work that needs to happen there that has an influence on that 6 months selling period. And then there's a lot of influence that goes into that 6 months period as well. So maybe let's talk a little bit first around like I put it on the market. Median, it takes 6 months, but my business could sell like a hotcake within 3 weeks, or it could take 12 months or even a year and a half. What is kind of like influencing that? So, based on your experience, Graham, and then I'm happy to tap into mine as well, like what's
Yeah.
influencing that particular part from as soon as it's on the market until it actually sells? What's been your experience there?
Yes, I'm going to talk about a few things here. The first two are quite obvious. The one is how ready is the business for sale? Okay. And the second is, you know, what is the underlying market like at the moment? Is it a bull market, a bear market, so to speak? So, is there a lot of uncertainty in the market? So those are kind of two factors, but I want to break that down a little bit further because there's also some other things you do need to think about is you think about the platform itself that's reporting on this can make a big difference, or the broker that's reporting on these numbers, because there's a lot of bias in that process. So when it comes to, so you touched on this earlier, it's a well-known stat that about 85% of businesses don't sell. Okay. So
Yes.
only 15 to 20% of businesses sell. Now, what a lot of platforms and brokers do is obviously they don't want a lot of bad stock sitting on their platform. So what a lot of these platforms and brokers do is they will turn away. They won't even list businesses that are not sellable. Okay. So you have to kind of understand that nuance, and you have to understand the process that the platform or the broker goes through to turn away the bad apples or the non-sellable businesses.
Yeah.
So some of the better platforms are actually quite, well, I say good, but they have a screening process and they won't allow you to list your business if there's a lot of red flags. So that's also a factor that can skew the stats somewhat. Okay. So, I would probably argue that the better the platform and the better the broker, the shorter the time from listing to sale. The more sort of like, hey, anybody can come and just put their wares over here, the longer the period's going to be. So that's kind of an overriding factor. And then I would talk a little bit about the actual sort of type of business that's being sold, the size of the business, the risk inherent in that, so it's a little bit of a almost like a W-shaped curve. So very, very small businesses can sometimes take a very long time to sell because they're not actually sale ready. Very big businesses, if they're unlisted and all of those things, can also take a long time to sell. But there are some sort of sweet spots in the middle where access to capital is easy. They're not very risky businesses. So the median is very, very dangerous here. You actually have to look at this by sector, by business size, by all those things. So medium gives a good kind of snapshot picture, but I would always say you got to dig deeper. If you're selling a business that sells horse-drawn carriages, okay, it's going to be a lot harder to sell than a business that's selling AI, AI-driven driverless cars, for argument's sake. I'm using a bad analogy, so all those factors, I mean, I'm sure we'll dive into each of those a little bit more now, but those are, yeah, some big things that you need to think about.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So, yes, super valuable there. Let's talk a little bit about the process before a business actually gets listed, right? Like, let's assume, I mean, there's some kind of screening that is happening either by a broker or by the platform in order to list your business or not, or like put it on sale your business or not. But let's talk a little bit about the process before, because I mean, obviously, depending on the sector that you're in, whether that sector is hot or not, the size of your business, etc., it will influence the time on the market. But then there is a huge factor that is actually kind of happening beforehand that
Yeah.
defines your overall preparation of selling your business. Because by the time that you are listing your business, most people will already have done certain things. It's the same like with selling a house. Like as soon as you put your house on the market, I mean, there's obviously factors that will drive how long it will take to sell. For example, how easy it is for buyers to get access to capital to buy your house. Are there
Yeah.
many, is it like a 3-bedroom home in the suburbs with a garden? You'll probably get more buyers for that than, like a 1-bedroom house that doesn't have a garden and needs renovating. Like there's all of these things that influence it, and it's based on the type of house that you have and how many clients are there to potentially buy that property and things like that. So there's that part, but then there's also the part in like preparing your house before you put it on the market or preparing your business before you put it on the market. And that is equally crucial and often even is a lot more time involved than actually putting it on the market and getting it sold. So let's talk a little bit about that because from a business owner's perspective, I think it's important that you don't assume that the time between, oh, I want to sell my business and actually selling your business is going to be like something like 6 months, because that is absolutely not the
Yeah.
case. There's just a lot of work that needs to happen beforehand. So let's talk a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, that could probably be a whole conversation on its own in terms of getting exit ready. But I think it is the first foundation. And usually that period is anywhere between 18 months and I would probably say 3 years. Most businesses, whether it's getting them ready in terms of all the processes and systems and removing owner dependence and all of that sort of stuff, but it's also usually a psychological process for the owner to go through to say, actually, I'm ready to sell my business. Okay. So on average, we see that process taking anywhere from 18 months to 3 years. Okay. So that's
Great.
quite interesting because when we say you put it on a platform, and even for smaller businesses, it can take that long. The sale process can take 6 to 12 months, but the readiness process usually takes longer. Now, I do want to just add something to that. Is at the end of the day, it's also about price versus speed. Okay, so if you're selling something, whether it's a house or a business, okay, if you want to get top dollar for your business, the preparation period usually takes longer. So you can sell something quickly, but you may get a fraction of what it really is worth or potentially worth. So there's other big assumption over here is that most business owners want to get the best possible price or value for their business. That's why that preparation time is important. If you came and did the preparation, and let's say with preparation, your business is worth $3 million, but without it, it's worth $1 million. If you went and listed that business for $3 million without the preparation, it's going to sit there and it's not going to sell. Okay. But if you listed it for $800,000, okay, it would still sell quickly, okay, because it represents a good value, and somebody else can come in and put the time and effort to do all the hard work that you didn't do before. So that's the sort of, I do want to draw that distinction. Is it's kind of a bit of a trade off here. And I'm assuming there's a ground level of readiness that exists in any business. Okay, so um, yeah, 18 months to 3 years, depending on, are there businesses where that period is shorter? Absolutely. Usually, those are businesses that have been around for a while. The owners have had the mindset from day one in terms of building a business for a potential sale. But frankly, what I see, that's sort of the top 5 or 10% of businesses that sell that are already at that space. We talking to the majority, and the majority of people aren't ready and need that prep time.
Yeah. I think where I also see that where that happens in a shorter time frame, like preparing the business to put it up for listing, is with business owners who have been um, building their business from a perspective of building freedom for themselves. And I'm not
Mm,
necessarily going to call them lifestyle businesses because that makes it has a bit of a negative connotation, as in
yeah,
like, oh, these are just business owners that, they don't really want to build a business and all they want to do is like happy, happy, joy, joy, having a great life. Yet lifestyle businesses, if I have to put a label on it, I sometimes also call them freedom businesses or freedompreneurs. They often build their businesses with building a level of freedom or like having a level of freedom in mind. And often that means
mm,
they are by nature avoiding the business to revolve and evolve around them, and
mm,
creating levels of freedom by delegation, by automation, by putting procedures in place, because that gives them that level of freedom that they are looking for. And the
yeah,
beauty of that is it makes a really sellable business because the founder owner has always had that vision in mind of not being too heavily involved in client delivery work, operational work, and be more involved in the strategic thinking, the long term vision, the finances of the business, maybe a little bit of hiring, like these kinds of
yeah,
activities, rather than being very operationally active. So I work with a lot already for like 15 years with these freedompreneur entrepreneurs. And they have great businesses that are very sellable because they have that level of freedom built in for themselves already as owners. So I think there's another, that category of entrepreneurs that have built very sellable businesses, and therefore the preparation that is needed before listing those businesses is very limited.
mm,
There might be some work that needs to happen in terms of profitability or a little bit of, scaling up in that sense. But most of the time, these businesses are very owner independent already because they have been built that way
yeah,
specifically. So, and they go faster than those 18 months or up to 3 years of preparing a business for sale. So, just to kind of like summarize that a little bit. So, putting your listing or your business up for sale until you sell it, there's a lot of things that influence it, but like median, that's going to be something like 6 months,
mm,
assuming your business is ready to sell and assuming that the market is not doing any kind of crazy things. And it is a sellable business and it is priced at a reasonable price and all these considerations. And then there's the prep work time that can be anywhere between like a year and 3 years. And depending on how much time you take, you can probably, increase the value of your business before you actually sell it. And most entrepreneurs want to sell for top dollars. Some want speed. I recently had a conversation with an entrepreneur who was like, I want to sell this business, like preferably yesterday, more than tomorrow. And then there's obviously no prep work that can be done, and the business is going to be sold in a way that it's currently is, which might mean that it's not going to sell for top dollar, but that's the consequence of having a speedy sale and a quick sale, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah,
Anything you'd
100%.
like to add to that, Graham?
No, I think, I mean, maybe I'm leading kind of onto the next question, but I mean, so now assuming you've prepared your business and you've listed it, that 6 month period, I think it's also maybe important, Lynn, to break down what happens in that 6 month period. Okay.
Yeah, I'd
Um,
love that. We still have a little bit of time to
yeah,
cover
so,
that
so
as
maybe
well
let's,
because it's a big black box for a lot of people and they don't really know what's happening there in that process between listing and getting the money wired. So yeah, let's
yeah.
just dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, let me break that down very quickly. And again, the assumption I'm making here is let's say, you know, $2 million and less businesses. Okay. Obviously, bigger businesses, the process can be somewhat different. But let's say you go to a listing site, you list your business. The first thing that has to happen is there's got to be people have to see that business. Okay. So there's got to be expression of interest, and buyers need to say, hey, I'm interested in looking at the business. So that takes time to get visibility and people to say, okay, this is an interesting business worth looking at. Then what has to happen is they have to evaluate that business to say, okay, I'm interested in this business. And usually that first phase is what you call making an indicative or a non-binding offer, different terminology, different parts of the world. A memorandum of understanding that says, hey, we're interested. We think the price looks kind of fair or in our ballpark. And that can take a few weeks, okay, to get that ready. And there's usually a form of a legal document that supports that. At that point, the seller may have one or two or three potential offers that they look at, and they might decide to say, okay, well, look, they've got to evaluate the different offers that come through. Usually at that point, they will select a preferred, a second, or a third kind of potential buyer. That takes a bit of time. Then at that point, there's a discussion around the fundamentals, like is the price in the right ballpark? Are you looking for a cash only deal? So key deal terms would kind of be discussed and included in that sort of non-binding offer. And you need to agree and negotiate that. So let's assume you do that. What then typically happens is you have to kind of validate, okay, um, all those assumptions and put together a binding offer. That's what's typically referred to as a due diligence process. Okay, so once you kind of sign an exclusivity, you sign an NDA and all those things that you can kind of look under the hood, the seller would send you information so that you can make a more refined offer, and you can give yourself comfort that what's being represented is the revenue actually the revenue. Is the market the size of the market? And that process takes time. In a smaller business, it can take 2 to 3 to 4 weeks. Going and checking the bank statements to see that, okay, if the revenue number they say it was $1 million, simple check. Has there been $1 million flowing in from the payment gateways into the bank account? Checking expenditure, checking the contracts, all of that, and that can take simple businesses, I would say 2 to 4 weeks. Okay. After that, assuming everything goes well, then you prepare what's called a binding offer. So beyond that point, the offer gets made. Is if you pull out at that point, then usually there's consequences. There's either a penalty fee or a break fee. And basically, you've shaken hands on the deal now. The deal's going ahead. And then the last step in the process is usually around the actual legal agreements. And I am simplifying it because of the time, but also because, these are the key steps, is you have to go and say, okay, we've sat around the table, we've agreed this is what the sale looks like. But here is the actual legal documents that represents that. Okay. And that can take, a few weeks to get sorted out for a smaller business. There's some other things that happen all along this process as well. you need to actually see, does the buyer actually have money? So, sometimes the seller will do a due diligence on the buyer as well. Are they who they say they are, and all of that. So it works both ways, but usually that process happens in parallel and it doesn't kind of extend the period. And then importantly is you get to the sort of closing and the post-deal period. So usually there's a window, after the money changes hands and all of that, where you do a transition from the previous owner to the new owner and suspensive conditions and all those kinds of things. So I've kind of simplified the process quite a lot, but that's what takes the time. That can take 6 months, it can take 9 months. The one thing I do want to mention, and it's not a process thing, is the longer that period gets drawn out, there's a real thing called deal fatigue. Okay. So,
Mm.
and this is why, looping right back to the beginning, if your business is not ready for sale and you pick up stuff in that process which is inconsistent with what's been presented up front, it creates doubt. And the longer a process drags on for, the more doubt, the less likely the deal is to actually happen at the end of the day. And then you have wasted everybody's time. You've gone through a 6-9 month process only for the deal to fail at the last hurdle, and everybody's then annoyed. So anyway, hopefully that gives a little bit of context. I'm checking an eye on the time, probably enough for you to do a wrap up, and that's it.
Also, well, thank you for just kind of like walking us through that process. And there's so much we could talk about that specifically. But I think it's good for people to, understand where, that median 6 months of between listing and actually closing the deal, what happens in that period. But also, I think we've mentioned it on the show that the whole prep period before the actual listing takes 3-4 times longer, specifically if you want to put in an effort to sell your business for top dollars and maximum value. And that's where we come in with the big exit as well, is to help you do that and put in the work so you can actually have your big exit. So it's kind of like what we covered on this show. So the overall question is, how long does it take to sell a business? On average, or as a median, between a listing and selling, what the recent data shows is 6.1 months, but the prep work can take anything in between, like a year up to 3 years. So that would be the short answer, but watch the full show to get like the nuanced version of that, because that's obviously what your experience is going to be like. No one's average and no one is the median. And we all have our own personal experiences, and it really depends on how ready your business is for a sale, how ready you are for a sale as a business owner as well, and how much money you want to get from your sale as well, and how quickly you want to sell your business too. So that's kind of like the wrap up of this show for today. So that's a wrap up for this week's episode of the Master Your Exit live show. Thank you so much for joining me and Graham today. I hope you're leaving with some valuable insights to help you prepare for your big exit. So remember, you can catch the replay of this episode and all other episodes on our website at thebigexit.co/master your exit shows, with a little dash in between, or listen to the audio version on your favorite podcast platform. Now, we'd love to hear from you as well. You can send in your exit questions before next week's show by heading over to our website, thebigexit.co/master your exit sign up. You can sign up there and send us your exit related questions, and we can answer them on next week's show or any future episodes. So we'll be back next Tuesday at 7 a.m. in LA, 10 a.m. I was going to say p.m., but 10 a.m. in New York, or 3 p.m. in London, with more tips, expert interviews, and tools to master your exit. Until then, I would say keep building, keep preparing, and we'll see you next week. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks, Graham, as well.
Everyone, see you next week.
Awesome. Thank you.